tell everybody that Andy is treasured alumni and is now at Oklahoma, where he's going to learn to refresh his Southern accent, which I think is great. Was really a stellar resident here, an excellent chief. Did extra training, and he did extra training both in the business aspects of medicine as well as the subspecialized. But Andy's very, very good at everything he does, and I think that's one thing he found is that his talents, because of his versatility, are very, very important. And he's going to talk a little bit about finding his path and finding his career choices and making good career choices. I think that's invaluable for residents. So it's great to have you back. And we're going to, start having events in the summer and fall and start trying to get alumni back on a regular basis for events, courses, and ceremonies. So this is just the start, even though it's virtual. Great to see you, Andy. Please proceed.
Great to see you, sir. Thanks for the generous introduction there. I think hi to all you guys that I haven't got to say hi to you. Dan, I see you. Really appreciate Dan asking me to do this talk. So thanks so much for having me back. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and honestly, for me, it's a little bit of I don't know to say an emotional experience, but it's been a long haul in terms of kind of what I've done since I left there and lessons I've learned. And so I don't know if I'm really qualified to give this talk from a business standpoint, but from a sort of an experiential standpoint, I think that maybe this will be a little bit useful for some of the residents. I think faculty-wise, you guys have all found good jobs there. I don't know if there is any place better than there. I really appreciate my time there, and I'll tell you a little bit about how much I think you guys should all appreciate being there, the residents, because I just got a wonderful education, and I couldn't have asked for better. I'm here now in Oklahoma. This is Oklahoma City, and this is our new hospital that just opened. It looks a little bit like a spaceship, especially compared to this old building that looks like a prison here. But we're really happy here in Oklahoma City. There's about 2 million people in the area, and it's a very livable and simple city. Sorry. I have really no disclosures. I've been in many different jobs, and I won't. I'm happy to share whatever I can with you guys. I'll certainly answer any questions that are asked. But this I think can be a little bit more of an informal type of talk. So if anybody has questions, please don't hesitate to ask. This picture back from Madison. This is myself when I was a little skinnier, my wife, and Professor Yassergill with my oldest daughter, Cameron, who I'll show another picture of later. But this is when she was a baby. I've kept this picture ever since. If she ever wants to be a neurosurgeon, I hope that it'll be there. But this is one of my favorite pictures from back in Madison. So this is the journey that I've taken, and I think that any of you can probably have a similar path with different locations. But I grew up in northern Arkansas. Actually, my family's originally from Wisconsin and sort of northeast Wisconsin up by Green Bay. And I grew up in Arkansas. I went to medical school at the University of Missouri. Came to Madison. Those were really some of the best years of my life, I think. And then after I left there, I went to Cleveland. I did a 3-year fellowship at the Cleveland Clinic doing endovascular, and I guess technically a 2-year fellowship, and I worked there doing cerebrovascular for open cerebrovascular for a year as well. And really enjoyed my time there. That's a much different healthcare system to see. So I think that it's useful to go into those experiences sometimes. While I was in Madison, I did get an MBA, like we were talking about when people were logging on there, from George Washington University. I think there are some advantages to that. There's probably a few disadvantages too. Most of it was financial at the time that I was doing it, but I then wandered off the beaten path, sort of, at least for me, from an academic institution to Boulder, Colorado, where I was in private practice for almost 4 years there. And it was a straight private practice, not a hospital employed position. And there's some nuances to that I didn't really know. And I don't think that most people would know going into a job like that. And so it wasn't really the right job for me for a number of reasons, and I can explain all of those. It was an experience nonetheless, and one that I think ended up with me here now, back in academics in Oklahoma City. A really quick shout out to my chairman here, Dr. Ian Dunn, who's just absolutely fantastic individual, and I'll always be indebted for him for sort of taking a chance on me to come back from private practice into academics. And so really happy here. And so it's a journey, and it's one that, you know, I don't think it's bad to come back to. This is just a slide. I don't know, some of you may have heard of this. This was a sort of this healthcare consortium type of thing that they had developed. It was in Boston, called Haven. And it was a joint venture between Amazon, JP Morgan, and Berkshire. And so you got Jeff Bezos and Jamie Dimon and Warren Buffett here. And these guys were trying to, and this isn't really related to getting a job, but they were trying to fix healthcare essentially. You know, they've got between the three of these CEOs, they have about 1.2 or 1.5 million employees. And so they were trying to insure themselves. And this lasted for a year. This is Atul Gawande, the CEO that they hired, who I'm sure all of you have heard of. Lasted for 3 years, and it just went bust because these guys couldn't figure it out either. And so, you know, I don't think you have to feel bad when you don't really understand how healthcare works, because you know, these are some of the smarter individuals around, and they couldn't figure it out either. So, you know, I think that this stuff is really complicated, and a lot of it comes down to what you want to do and what you like to do. I think, you know, when I didn't do any of this stuff. So first of all, this talk I developed later on, I didn't do really any of this. I did some of this thinking, but probably very little of it when I went into getting jobs and picking a fellowship and doing these different kinds of things. And so, you know, I think if you think about the types of things that result in burnout, or things that result in people being unsatisfied with their jobs, you know, there's some papers written on this. And so my talk is a little probably devoid of data, but there's a few papers in here that discuss these kinds of things. And so when you look at these odds ratios of being either burned out or happy, you know, malpractice is a big one. Actually, working in academics, as I found my happiness actually kind of reduces the risk of burnout. I think because you don't have to do so many of the business types of things. Healthcare reform, this was a slightly older article in 2015 when this stuff was going on. So people were really worried about this, increases your chances of burnout. The more cases you do actually was, I think probably with financial security, was helping people with their job satisfaction. And then, you know, being challenged, I think, is another thing. Having kids, another thing. So having a good family. So I think a lot of these factors are really factors that are not related to the job itself. They're related more to you and what you are looking for in a job. And so when you start to look at these things, you know, how do you set yourself up for this? And we're trying to put some stuff together for our residents here along the same lines, because, you know, you kind of wonder, like, how do you set yourself up for success? And I didn't spend a whole lot of time wondering about that when I was a resident. Matter of fact, I probably didn't spend almost any, because you kind of thought, well, you spent 7 years here, I'm going to spend some more time somewhere else, and I'm sure it's all going to work out. It's not quite that simple, I think. You know, what you learn is how to do cases, how to evaluate patients, how to talk to patients. You miss out on some of this stuff about, like, how do you run your practice, or where do those patients come from? How do they come to see you, and how do you find them? And so these aspects for a lot of people, I think, the ones about running the practice may not be all that enjoyable, so people don't focus on them that much. Some people worry about the loss of autonomy a little bit, because now, especially for people that are less than 40 years old, certainly the most popular avenue is being hospital employed. 80% of the young physicians are becoming hospital employed. And then, quite frankly, very, very few of us have much business sense. We like working with people. We like, taking care of patients, and we don't think that much about the financial aspects unless you're running the department. And so, I think there's a number of things that you don't necessarily pick up in training because you just don't focus on those things. And so, when you think about practice building and generating referrals, I think we as residents, you get called about all these consults, and they just happen to be there. They come to UW, they come to OU, they come wherever they come, and they call you about them, and you're kind of annoyed by being called by them. But when you go out into practice, these patients have to come from somewhere, and they don't know you're there, and you may not take their insurance, or there's a number of complexities to that. Managing a clinic is really complicated too, being sort of a leader and taking that on. I'm the medical director here for our adult clinics, and managing 30 employees or so and trying to get everybody in the right place and to get along is harder than you might expect. Overhead, we don't think about that either, the amount of cost that it takes to run a clinic. This is a big one, I think, here. The things that I thought as a resident, I thought, oh, well, when I'm finished, I'm going to have a PA, I'm going to have, this and that, and different ways of running my clinic. Well, that all costs a lot of money. And when you're in practice, you have to pay for that. So it doesn't quite work out as simple as that. You have all these ways of making your clinic efficient, but you have to pay for that in the end. And so that comes out of your pocket, typically. And so there's also a number of barriers moving. You think you're going to go somewhere, and if it doesn't work out, you'll just change. There's a number of barriers for doing that. We're going to talk about those. And then this is a big one. I'm not going to talk about this a ton today. This is a whole nother talk in and of itself. But when you go out there, I don't think you get a lot of exposure to that in residency. It's not allowed in most academic institutions and things like that. But there's a number of other revenue streams, which, depending on your point of view, is either a great thing because you're making a killing, or you might find it somewhat ethically or morally objectionable, and it adds to your stress. And so, a lot of these places will have other ancillary sources of income: imaging centers, surgery center ownership, physician-owned distributorships, where there's at least a perceived conflict of interest. And for me, that really added a lot to my stress levels when I was out there. So the different kinds of jobs are available. Yeah, I think most of you are probably familiar with this. There's, private practice is kind of a big lump of different things. You can be in a group practice, which is a true private group. You can be in solo practice by yourself. I think that's becoming less and less common, but there are still a few people that are doing that. And then this has become really popular, which is hospital employed, which you basically get paid a salary to work for a hospital, and you don't have all those issues with running the practice or things like that, but you also maybe don't have as high of a ceiling in terms of income. Academics, all of us are familiar with that. Private-demics, these are interesting relationships sometimes, because you sometimes get the best and the worst of both worlds, I think. But typically these are affiliated with academic institutions, so there's some research involved and maybe teaching. But the salaries are typically higher. There are people that are just doing pure locums now, traveling around and doing work wherever it needs to be done. And I have a family and didn't really want to be traveling a ton, but these can be lucrative as well. And then some people work for the government. There's decent military jobs and VA jobs and whatnot. I think that the whole talk really comes down to this. This is obvious, and probably people have thought about this, but I think when you start thinking about a job, and it really comes down to what you want, and trying to find what you want and understanding what you're about to get. I think is really the big point of it is trying to understand what some of these jobs are about and how you're going to be happy there. And so there's things like location, and some people are really focused on the income part. And in my particular case, this wasn't the biggest driver of what I was trying to do there. It really never has been, and still isn't. But it kind of comes with most of these jobs. But that certainly wasn't my biggest thought. This is big for a lot of people. Work-life balance, especially now. It's harder to find in neurosurgery, I think. But I think that these things are, and you could put a lot more factors on here that people can think about. So these are things that I look back on, and wish that maybe I would have thought more about. Now, again, I certainly am not saying that I'm not happy with what I did. I was unhappy for about 4 years, but it ended up getting me here, and it all worked out in the end. And so, but I think that when you start to look at jobs or fellowships or other things, thinking about some of these principles is really useful, just so that you don't end up in a situation where you might be unhappy. These contracts and things are not designed for your benefit. Typically, when they offer you a contract, and it's kind of the house rule, so to speak, and these are designed for one, the practice to get something from you. They're designed for the practice certainly not to lose something from you if you decide to leave or something like that. And so you have to be really careful when you're evaluating these. Again, I had an MBA when I was doing this, but I got a contract that's like 20 pages long, and I didn't understand half of the wording in there because it's made by lawyers, and I didn't go to a lot of trouble to dissect it. And there's a lot of things in there that are sort of important to know. Really, again, it's about you and what you want, but you have to know what you want in order to find what you want. And then knowing the market, this has become easier more recently because there's a lot more data sources that are available. But like MGMA or Nerves have a lot of data about these kinds of jobs. You can certainly find a lot through the word of mouth and former colleagues or friends. That's kind of really the main thing that I used when I was evaluating these jobs. But then there's a number of industry sponsored data. I got some data about referrals and things like that from a few of the endovascular device companies. They have a lot of that data. Places like Rossman Search that do physician placement have a lot of data about this kind of stuff, and you can get a hold of that. So I think that's helpful. And then, I would just be careful here in terms of, sticking with people that because it all comes back to here, right? It's you typically sometimes the people that and the people that you're talking to, they're trying to get something out of the thing too. And so, I think that this is a great way of finding jobs. It's certainly the way I found this one. And as a matter of fact, I guess it's pretty much the way I found all the jobs that I've done, and some of them worked out well, and some of them maybe not as much. But I think knowing some data to use in addition to this is really helpful. And then I really can't stress this one as much or enough. Rather, you'll have the same thought as me, which you don't really want to spend a couple $1,000s doing this, but it's really, really valuable to have an attorney that knows what they're doing. Look through these contracts and dissect it for you.
Andy, can I?
Absolutely.
This is Than. I just want to make a comment here. Also, start early is another general principle, because it takes about 3 months in most jobs to just get credentialed, let alone get through all the negotiations of contracts and things like that. So they're going to know that you're running out of time, especially if you're in a fellowship, and so that makes it very hard for you to negotiate if you're too late in the game.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And I think I think if you're doing a 1-year fellowship, I think starting this process before you even get in the fellowship is a good idea, or at least knowing where you want to be and maybe setting out some feelers and things like that. But absolutely, the more you come up under pressure to have a job, say you're doing it 2 or 3 months before you are scheduled to leave somewhere, you are also going to feel the pressure to just take whatever's there, and that's how you end up in situations where you're not super happy. And so then, knowing about these contracts, there are, like I said, I think mine was 20 some odd pages, and there are a lot of things in here that are negotiable. A whole lot of things that can be negotiated, and so these things are all important things to think about, and really to assign some degree of value to, for you. And so maybe salary is the biggest one. Maybe that's your biggest value, and that's what you're going after. Maybe it's location, and you really want a job in Madison, and you're willing to compromise the salary to do that, or maybe it's some of these other things, ownership of intellectual property, or ancillary revenue streams. Maybe you want to be part of that. Maybe that's really important to you. And so knowing that all of these things are negotiable in the contracts, I think is really important. And a few of these I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail, because I think a lot of residents, be that in neurosurgery or in other specialties, I think that a few of these concepts, like income guarantees and malpractice tail coverage, are not well known to people before they get into trouble with them. So I mean, for me, I think that some of these ones are the more important ones to think about. Is in terms of happiness. Again, this wasn't really my primary thing here in terms of salary, but I think for a lot of people it is, certainly. The way the referrals are distributed in a practice, a lot of practices you'll get there and you're the junior person, and say all the insured patients or all of the surgical patients or all of certain groups of patients will be taken by the partners, and you're kind of left with the rest. Maybe you have Medicaid, or maybe you have uninsured, or maybe whatever, and that's fine. But I think knowing that and having that spelled out in the contract is an important thing to look at. Call compensation is, I don't think, super common, or at least it hasn't been where I have gone. I have met a few people here and elsewhere, though, where that was really, really important to them. Like if they're going to take call, they really want to be compensated to be on call. And so, if that's important to you, I think that that's one to flesh out in the contract as well. I mean, personally, I think that the cases you get from being on call are kind of the compensation for being on call. So, but I know that there are places that pay for this, and the practice I was in Boulder, the practice got paid very well for this, very, very well for this. And so that's important to know what's in the contract for that. And then this tail coverage, I'm going to talk about that again in a second. So this came out, unfortunately, after I was doing this. This came out just last year in 2020, but this was by the CSNS, and actually Todd Barnes is our business administrator here in our department here in Oklahoma City, and so this I thought was a really pretty well thought out paper in terms of thinking about these. It's the only one I really found in terms of how to do this kind of stuff, and so. What they looked at, there's not a great deal of data, but again, they looked at the things in the contract that could provide value to you. And it's not all compensation. There's certain values to maybe having your loans forgiven, or how much call you're going to take, or do you have dedicated overtime, or all these things. And you might expect when you graduate that all that stuff is obvious. It's going to be there, right? You're going to have overtime, or of course, if you take a job, you're going to have plenty of time in the OR. That's not necessarily the case. And some of these jobs you get there and they say, well, you don't have any block time. So whatever cases you generate, you got to find some time for them. And usually that time is in the evening, or, in not so wonderful blocks. And so you have to be a little bit careful there. A lot of these practices, you hear of this eat what you kill, which is basically, whatever cases you do and whatever you collect from them, that's your income, versus having sort of a shared income model in the practice. Certainly, I would apportion more value to a practice that has this model than this one, because again, depending on how they distribute your consults and things like that, if you're only seeing, say, the uninsured or Medicaid, you're going to be doing a lot of cases, but you're not going to be collecting a whole lot from that, and that's important. It's none of us want to think about money, but at the same time, if you're doing all of that, your family has to eat and stuff like that too. So thinking about this a little bit is an important thing. I really think this is the most, for me, this was it. It was the people that you're involved with, and do you like them? Do you like being around them? That was where I found happiness. And so, I think looking at this list and kind of coming up with what's important to you is a really good place to start. What they did in the paper then, sorry, this looks a little blurry on the slide here now, is they basically took the list and they apportioned certain monetary values to these things. So say you want to be in the city, that's worth $100,000 to you or whatnot. And so they came up with a number value as to what some of these things were worth. And they look through, then when you're evaluating a job, you could say, well, it's really good in salary compensation, but it's in a location that I don't want to live in. And so you have to assign some sort of value to these, and you can come up with your own numbers for all of these things here. This, again, I didn't want to put too much data in here, but this is the most recent. We just went through here kind of designing a brand new model for how we get compensated. But so we had some of this data around, and so this is available. This one's from the AAMC. The next slide I have is the MGMA stuff, and so they look across the country, and you're a clinical instructor versus a chairman. And they look at, you basically typically look at the 50th percentile here and see sort of what is the average that a neurosurgeon gets compensated. And you can compare what you're being offered to these numbers. And you can see, so say, for instance, if you're in a super desirable location that everybody wants to be and it's very competitive, you're going to be down here somewhere. Whereas, maybe if you live in the middle of, Kansas or, I don't know, rural Oklahoma or something like that, where not as many people want to be, they're going to pay up here somewhere. And so, that's just how all jobs work typically. But I think that this is, for me, this just wasn't something that I focus on a ton. And I've been pretty happy with my salary everywhere I've been so far. So I can't complain about that. So when you look at different models here, there's in private practice, there's this eat what you kill, there's a revenue sharing model. And so those are a little different than what you typically find in more academic jobs or maybe sometimes private jobs. And a lot of these jobs relate to RVUs, which are relative value units, essentially. And that's how Medicare and CMS and everybody will sort of assign value to the work that you do. And the things that are important on here, there's a lot of numbers on this slide. This is from the MGMA data from 2019. If you look at the collections on average for neurosurgery, the mean was here. So this is what you collect for what you bill. Now, if you look down here, these are the charges that you billed, and this is what you collected. So that's the other thing that I think some people probably recognize by now, but a dollar billed is not a dollar collected, and it certainly isn't a dollar in your pocket. So there's a big difference between these numbers here. And then when you think about RVUs, there's total RVUs, and that is based upon sort of the complexity of the case, the practice costs that are associated with that, and then there's work RVUs. So that's the work that it takes you to do the case. And so typically in 2019, at least, the average compensation per work RVU is about $100. And so again, these are the charges that people had. And then this was the mean in terms of work RVUs that people were doing. So this is the 50th percentile for neurosurgery. People were doing about 10,000 RVUs across the board as an average. Now, there are some people that are doing, the 90th percentile is way up here, 16,000 RVUs, and the 10th percentile down here at 4,000. So there's a big range for that. But that's how a lot of jobs, including the one I'm in right now, sort of calculates things like productivity bonuses and things like that, as they take the number of RVUs that you're doing. They typically will compare it to something like a mean or something like that, and then maybe you're going to get a bonus for whatever you did that's above that. Say, I did whatever 12,000, and that's above this mean. You get some extra compensation for that. So that's kind of how that works. The models are much more complicated than that, but that's kind of in general how these things work. So just hopefully quickly here, and I'm not getting too far on time, but
you're fine, Andy.
There's a couple of what I would say is special considerations, just things that are really things that you don't think about, or that I didn't think about at all when I was taking these jobs, really, and what these things mean. And so we'll just go over those real quick. So an income guarantee. So most jobs that you find will have something like this. Maybe not as much in an academic center. You might get paid a straight salary or something, but really any other job, a hospital employed job, a private practice job, is going to have some sort of an income guarantee. And so what that is essentially a loan that you're given to establish your practice. So you go out and say they'll tell you, say, for your first year income is going to be $600,000. Well, the first 3 months that you're there, you're just trying to figure out how to get to the OR and what you're doing and stuff like that. So you're not billing a whole lot. Then the other thing is a thing called the billing cycle, where once you submit a bill, it might take 3 to 6 months for that to get paid. And so you could conceivably go the entire first year that you're there and not get paid a dime because you haven't collected anything. And so this is aimed to bridge the gap between when you start working and when you start collecting money. And so basically what they will do is give you this, it's a forgivable loan that will guarantee your income for a couple of years. Now, where this is, that looks great. A lot of these hospitals are offering huge amounts of money, sometimes $900,000, $1 million a year. And you're coming out of fellowship and you're like, oh my God, that's 100 times more money than I've ever made in my life. And it seems wonderful. Well, there is definitely a flip side to that, because they're not just giving away free money. And so if you don't make this eventually or stay in the community for a certain length of time, you are going to be paying that back. And so this is, I mentioned earlier, some barriers to leaving jobs. This is one of them. And so typically what they do is they forgive the loan based on how long you work there. And it's typically 2 years for 1 year so 1 year on the income guarantee. You got to work there for 2 more years after that is closed. And then they will forgive the loan at that point in time. And say you work there for 2 years on an income guarantee, then you might have to stay in the community for 4 years to get this forgiven, or you have to pay some of it back. And another thing to think about in your contract is to know when this gets closed. That's one thing I did not do, and I regretted quite a bit, because you don't really know, if you're not controlling it, you don't really know when the practice closes this loan. If it's coming through the practice, when they close that out with the hospital, you don't know exactly when that is, and you want it to be as soon as possible. The transparency and the finances of some of this stuff is not great. So you want to specify all that in the contract. And so the other thing about this is that an income guarantee does not reflect a long-term sustainable income. So for instance, I know somebody in the community here that had a 2-year income guarantee, was making, I think, $900,000. There's no way that in the hospital system that he was in, that he could have enough cases, enough referrals, enough anything to generate $900,000 a year once his income guarantee was up. So you're sometimes taking a big pay cut. They give you large money to come into jobs that may not be that desirable, but you really want to look at the long-term sustainability of where you're going. So that's kind of what this income guarantee is. It really looks good when you're applying, and when you've never made a huge amount of money before, so this looks really attractive, but you really want to flesh out all the details of it, because it can burn you badly. This is another one. So partnership and buy-in, and what does all that mean? Typically a practice is a business, and so it's kind of like becoming a majority shareholder or a minority shareholder or whatnot. There's some sort of buy-in for most of these practices, and it can be structured in different ways. In my particular practice, they harvested essentially the money that I was being paid for call, and so I took a whole lot of call. I took basically every other day call and every other weekend call at 5.5 hospitals, and that's a whole lot of work. But they harvested the call stipends for that, and that's the buy-in. And so if you add all that up over a number of years, it comes out to be a pretty large sum, and so that's your buy-in to a partnership. The other thing that you want to know is, what are you getting there? Does the partnership own a bunch of stuff? Do they own an MRI scanner? Do they own buildings? Do they own, whatever it might be? And do you get a part of that once you buy in? Really, what is the pathway to becoming a partner is another one that you have to define well in the contract. It's not just a given that once you work out your time sort of in the grunt levels that you're going to be a partner there, and that's an important one. I didn't do a good job of that. I didn't have a problem here in terms of my own job, but I definitely did not do a very good job of defining in written and very clear terms what it takes to become a partner there. And that wasn't very well spelled out in the contract, and so I would highly recommend that is crystal clear for everybody involved, what it takes to be a partner, because sometimes your practice will just say, all right, you've done your 3 years, we don't really need you here, like you're not going to be a partner, you're done, and then you're looking for a job and you did everything right. So you just want to flesh that out there. Restrictive clauses, this is something to consider, especially if you pick the job because you want to live in that area. You might take a job, say in Madison, and but something doesn't work out, but you love living in Madison, you want to be there, but your practice maybe has a clause we call it a non-compete clause that says that you cannot practice anywhere within, say, 30 miles of the hospital where you were employed. And that kind of means, well, you can't really live in Madison. You have to go work in Milwaukee or something like that. Now, most states, I don't know specifically about Wisconsin. I know in Colorado, these really weren't enforceable. It was in my contract, but everyone was like, there's no way they can enforce that. So you can kind of do whatever you want, but it's something to think about, because if you buy property and you own a home and your family's happy and all that stuff, you want to know what's going on with that. And so that can be a sticky barrier for leaving too. And then I think the biggest barrier for leaving or going somewhere else might be this one. And this is one that you really, probably most of you never have thought about. And this is how malpractice insurance works. And so, as a resident, you're covered for all this stuff, but once you get out, and depending on where you go, you have to purchase malpractice insurance, and it's either covered by the institution that you work for. Here in the university, I'm covered by the university, and ultimately I pay for that in some manner, but it's kind of behind the scenes. But if you're in private practice or solo practice, you are purchasing a policy from a company. And depending on the state where you work and the state of the tort reform there and all those things, that can cost anywhere from probably $30,000 to $40,000 a year to $500,000 a year. It can be a huge expense, and it can really be a headache when you try to leave because of the different kinds. And so basically, if you say for instance, you have this policy that you have it for 2 years, and you want to leave, you leave after the second year and you stop paying for it. they typically will have something called an extended reporting period on these claims made policies that maybe is another year or 6 months or something like that, that they're still going to cover you if somebody reports, an incident happens here and a claim happens here. There's some reporting period, but after that, you have to have something called tail coverage. And so say for instance, an event occurs here in the second year, but the patient doesn't report that until here, or they don't have a problem, the hardware fails, or whatever it is that they're going to sue you for, doesn't happen until out here, sometime in the fourth year, you're gone, you're practicing in a new place. If you have what we call occurrence-based insurance policy, this is the sort of the best one, I think, was what you want, is what I have here. This is a policy that it costs more upfront, the premiums are higher, but it will cover you for any events that happened in here while the policy was in effect, so in the first 2 years, regardless of whenever they're reported. So it essentially covers you for life. Like I said, it costs more in terms of premiums, but it will cover you for forever. That's in contrast to what most people have, which is called claims made policy. And so this covers you only for claims that were made in here. So the event might have happened here, patient reports it here. You are not covered for this under a claims made policy unless you buy tail coverage. And so you have to buy essentially a separate policy that's going to cover you all the way out here for any of these things that happen back here. So the event always has to happen when the policy is in place. They're not going to cover you for an event that happens out here, but it depends on really when it's reported, because these things, some of these things, take years to materialize. And so that's the difference between these two kinds of policies. Most people in private practice have this one because, like I said, it's cheaper. This tail coverage, depending on where you live and depending on where you practice, can really be a problem. So I mentioned this already. The cost of a tail coverage policy is typically twice the yearly premium. So when I bought this, when I left there, I paid I paid a lot of money, more than 6 figures for a tail coverage policy. And that can really be a barrier. I've certainly heard of people that lived in states like Illinois, Missouri before they had tort reform, that could not leave their job because they could not afford to buy this tail coverage policy. And most of the companies, luckily my company allowed me to pay it quarterly over, I think, 8 quarters. But most of them, they make you pay a lump sum. So, if you end up, say your policy is, if you have a $500,000 premium a year, that's a lump sum of $1 million that you got to pay to leave your practice, essentially, and get a new job. No other job's going to hire you until you have this kind of coverage in place. So that's a really, really important thing to think about. Who's going to pay for this tail coverage when you leave, or those things, and put that in there, because I think that's probably the one that can cook you faster than anything else. Originally, when Than had asked me to do this talk, it was kind of like, how do you practice endovascular? I only have like 3 slides to talk about that, so I didn't think that was going to make a full talk. That's why I put some of this other stuff in there. But I do a little bit of everything. I'm really, really grateful to my training there, because I've become kind of a utility guy. And for a number of years when I was in Cleveland, I didn't do very much spine, but here I probably do the second most spine in our department. I was doing that in private practice. I do a whole lot of spine. Until very recently, I was covering pediatrics. I was doing a lot of stuff. And so, I think that getting a broad-based training that you get there, just really, really, pay attention to it, respect it, and it will really serve you well later, because I might not have this job if I didn't have the ability to do other things. In private practice, subspecialties are somewhat difficult, because some of them don't reimburse as well. So say, for instance, functional, a lot of those cases just don't reimburse a ton. And so unless your practice somehow subsidizes your income, you have to do something else in order to make that up. And so, I think most people, the rule is just learn to do spine well, because everybody in private practice does spine. I mean, the cases are certainly more prevalent. It reimburses well. And so if you're going to do a subspecialty, you're going to be doing endovascular and spine, typically, or general neurosurgery. And so pay attention to that kind of stuff. Cerebrovascular in private practice, there just aren't a lot of guys that are doing a lot of open cerebrovascular out there. There's a few, but not a ton. I did some of those cases, but the things that you have to really consider is, can the hospital that you're working for handle that? Can they handle the ICU requirements of subarachnoid hemorrhage and those kind of things? And can you handle it? Because most of taking care of those patients falls to you. There's no neuro critical care service. There's no residents. So you are typically driving in to administer intrathecal milrinone or nicardipine or whatever it is that you're doing, and you're driving in to troubleshoot the ventriculostomy. So I think people gravitate away from doing those kinds of cases just because it really takes up a lot of your time. And what are you wanting to do? Are you wanting to do a bunch of aneurysms and AVMs? Do you really like doing stroke? What is it that you want to do? The very first, I think the second day I was in Boulder, I had like a meeting with the neurologist just to sort of say hello and introduce each other. And the very first thing they said to me was, "Man, I hope you're not planning on doing stroke here, because we have no interest in covering that call." I had never even thought of that before. And so I wasn't super interested in doing a lot of stroke because I was by myself doing endovascular, but it was one of those things where I was kind of like, oh, this is going to be a problem, because they had no interest in being on call for it. They shipped everything out of there that was a stroke consult, and they did not come and see those patients. So you really have to consider that for a stroke program. Call expectations, if you can make your life as a neurosurgeon worse, it's getting more call and doing stroke now. That's the way to do it. And so you want to know what those expectations are. I know a guy that he was out there, and they said, well, you're on call every day for stroke, and if you leave, it's your job to figure out someone else that can cover for you. So those things are important. I think when you start talking about taking that much call, compensation probably does become important, because your family is going to leave you otherwise. And then competition in the community. This is another one that's just really important when you go to private practice, knowing what is going on out there. Are there neurologists? Are there radiologists that are doing that? How do the insurance plans work? I had a number of patients in Boulder that flew right over the top of me to go to Denver because their insurance plan was in Denver. And they don't necessarily come to you because you're the closest guy that can take care of this kind of stuff. And that's kind of the same thing with EMS. Maybe EMS takes all the subarachnoid hemorrhage patients to the university, and that's just how they do it. And so they're not going to come to you. So you want to think about all those kinds of things. And then this is just another one where they looked at the burnout in neurointerventionalists. It turns out that the things that were important there were the number of hospitals that were covered, and turns out that, at least in this particular paper, that additional compensation for call was really important to people, and it made them happy. And that's something for me. I don't think that probably does it. And for each of you, you have to think about what it is that you want. And maybe you like taking a lot of call. Maybe that makes you really happy, or maybe you don't. And so those are the kinds of things to really think about there. For me, it's really the people. It's being around me. I like same kind of things I liked when I was there in Wisconsin. I like walking around to different operating rooms and seeing what people are doing, and hanging out with my colleagues and stuff like that. That was completely missing in private practice. Those guys were only interested in being there and sort of doing their cases and getting out and doing things outside the hospital. I'm so much happier here because I go to conference, I give talks, I work with the residents, I can wander into other people's ORs and see a cool skull-based case that's going on. And so for me, this was it. It was just really about the people that I was working with. It's about the I think that was my key to finding happiness. This is shout out to Dr. Dempsey here, but this is 2016 ended up being one of the better years of my life, for the Cubs finally won. Now they're not winning again, but here they are. And so, I think that the team that you're working with is just, for me, was really, really important. And then, just to conclude the talk here, I'm certainly happy to take any questions. I really think that neurosurgery for us is it's more of a lifestyle than a job. If it's a job to you, it's my own personal opinion is that this might not be the right spot for you. You might be happier somewhere else because it really is more of a lifestyle. Finding the right job, it's really more about you than it is about the job. There's plenty of different things out there, and you just have to find what you want out of it, and you really have to spend some time thinking about that. I mentioned this before. I'll mention it one more time. Just really having that contract looked at by an experienced attorney, I think is I took the bargain way out of that, and I regretted it quite a bit. So I don't recommend doing that. And then, you're thinking about value, your value, the things that you value in a job. I think all those things are really, really important. And then, really, the other thing is that these things are temporary. If you're miserable somewhere, just get out of there. And I have to give some credit to another former resident some of you guys will know, which was Nira Patel, because he went through some similar things to what I did. And I was talking to him, and he's like, I changed jobs, and overnight I was a brand new person, and my family was happier with me. And I kind of got to the point where I just didn't really like what I was doing, and my wife kind of said to me, like, what is wrong with you? You love this stuff. Like you're going to practice until you're 95 years old. And now you just want, I was talking about retiring in my early 50s or, whatever. And she's like, I didn't want to move because I didn't want to move my family and all those things. But, ultimately she was like, man, you're just not the same person. And, it's time to, figure it out and make it better. And so all these things are temporary. It's never too late to change. It's, you might start to think that, hey, I've been out of academics for too long and nobody's going to take me back. And I found that not to necessarily be the case. So, keep that in mind. And then this is, these are my kids now. This is this one here is my oldest daughter, Cameron, that you saw with Yastergill. She's 13 now, and my kids they're all big, but we have a little bit of land here in Oklahoma. They're running around on our 5 acres, and been really, really happy finally. And so I'm always happy to talk to anybody about this kind of stuff. I probably maybe am sometimes a little too honest about mistakes that I made in the past, but I really, really am indebted to the department there. I cannot tell you guys how good of an education. Sometimes you don't necessarily recognize it until you're gone. But just a phenomenal program. I'm the assistant program director here, and I'm really trying to model most of what we're doing exactly on what we did there, because I think it's just phenomenal, and I really thank all of you for that.
Andy, that was really a great talk, and I appreciate you taking the time to put that together. I want to, and I also I'm fascinated. So you have 5 acres. How many refrigerators do you have for the food for your children?
We have 3.
Okay, one per child, or almost one per child. Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. You guys,
and one for me.
Yeah, and one for you. Yeah. Does anybody have questions? I have quite a few, but I just want to.
I don't have a question, but I'd like to thank Andy, and we will have him back here on Saturday for our skull-based course. And Andy should be the role model for our residents, and you guys should follow him. He's a star, and he has been the most honest person I ever met. Andy, wonderful. Keep up with the good work. Thank you for doing this ground runs for our residents.
Not quite done yet.
I learned a lot. I didn't know any of these things when I signed the contract, but I know Dr. Dempsey wouldn't hurt me. So start with the good boss. You have to have a good boss first, okay?
That's 1,000,000% true, and I promise you, I would not be here if it were not for Dr. Berskaya. vouching for me, and I know that is the case, and so I'm very, very grateful for some of the best years of my life were spent there, and so pay attention, enjoy it. It's you will not regret it, I promise.
Thank you, Andy.
Dr. Bauer, could I please have your email? Wonderful lecture. I have questions that I don't want to ask you over here right now.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Let me just see if let me see here. Perhaps I can post it in the chat, or I can just give it to you. But it's Andrew-Bauer, ANDREW-Bauer, BAUER, at ouhsc.edu. Oh, here we go.
Andrew Bauer at ouhsc.edu. Thank you.
Yep, that's correct. Actually, I'm going to put my number here too, so in case anybody, happy to hear from anybody anytime.
So Andy, yeah, we're actually trying to establish kind of an adopt a resident mentoring program. So if you're available, I will add you to the list. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Love to do that.
Yeah, especially for people that have kind of taken kind of your subspecialty path. We try and match people up a little bit so they can figure out what their best kind of post residency, post fellowship course can be. I think that kind of also leads into my kind of comment / question. As we kind of watch the rise of endovascular throughout the late 2008, 2009, and then into the 2010s, there was a lot of the idea that it would end up in multiple places, that we'd be doing endovascular in northern Wisconsin and small towns, because that's what happened to cardiology. As we saw later on, it takes much more infrastructure than just having the neurosurgeon show up with their techniques. It requires anesthesia, neurology, and then also things like insurance policies and all those kinds of things to make it work. So I guess my commentary is that if you're interested in doing endovascular, you need to also understand that you're not necessarily, at least this is what we've seen over the years, you're not necessarily going to have as much flexibility with your job opportunities just from that subspecialty.
That's absolutely true, and it's a lot more than just showing up and sort of starting work. But it's there are a lot of things about that, about how to get patients and referrals and competition, all those things I just didn't think a lot about. And I didn't have any competition in Boulder. There was nobody else that was doing it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a whole bunch of people are going to come and see you. There's a big group, Swedish Medical Center in South Denver, that has a huge lock on the market there, and I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about that when I went. I thought, Boulder's like this destination town. It's beautiful. It's you kind of almost would think maybe people would just fly in there to have their aneurysms taken care of, and they might actually. They that was going to be something I was going to work on had I stayed, but it just wasn't the right fit for me there.
Andy, I wanted to echo Mustafa's comments. Thank you very much for this, and it's just amazing to see you again. I'm glad you got to do some peds. I'm sure you've done it as well as any of us could have.
I don't know.
But I want to warn everybody when they start working with Andy that the only way Andy accepted to do work in my lab is to have Ronald Reagan's picture posted on top of the microscope at all times. So we had to live with that for 2 years.
Amen, Andy.
Well, it was, I was going to do my best to keep the politics away from here, but when I was looking at jobs, when I was evaluating, there wasn't a single county that voted for Obama in Oklahoma in 2008. So, when I was considering places to come, it worked out pretty well.
That's your only major flaw, Andy. Otherwise, you're perfect.
Awesome. How are you, man?
Nice to see you. Thanks for coming. My small comment, I think, is really that what I found was, when you're transitioning to practice, that it's a mentality change. You have to put on your hat to advocate for yourself, and and all the things that all of residents have done to get to this point has been trying to please other people. And so really now when you're looking for a job, it's the first time I think in our professional lives we're actually having to say what we want and try to say it in a way that isn't off-putting and yet gets the point across that this really means something to us. And we're very ill-equipped to do that. It's the verbiage, it's the way, it's the things to ask for. So I think this is really, really helpful to put it out there so that even the junior residents start thinking about it.
Yeah, it's just like you said, it's something I didn't think about a ton. I really didn't. And I just kind of, some of these things just sort of fell in my lap. I said, oh, that's great. This will work out fine. And you'll set yourself up for success if you think about it a lot earlier.
Any other questions from the residents if there's not already in the operating room?
I'll just say one other thing that,
Yeah.
Your ability to operate lights out, it doesn't ensure an easy path, as Andy has demonstrated here. Andy is one of the most talented residents that's come out of our program, I think, at least the ones that I've seen in my small view. And it had innate talent, plus worked really, really hard. That's what Mustafa's comment was while he was here. Sought out every opportunity. So it's not about operative skill. This is a completely different set of skills that you need to find the.
It's totally almost disconnected from a lot of that, and it's disconnected from sort of your other than academic jobs. I think those are very well connected, but the your how much you love doing surgery is very disconnected from a lot of private practice jobs, and that's one of the things for me that I just didn't fit. It just wasn't. I like seeing other things, and walking into ORs and seeing what people are doing, and I just wasn't doing any of that stuff there. So yeah, it's I think it's totally disconnected from that. Yeah. And thank you for your kind and mostly undeserved commentary. Any of you guys, please, any of the residents that if I can be of assistance to you, just reach out, because I certainly have a lot of love for Madison and the program there.
That's great that you're so happy, Andy. That's great. I hope you're not still doing discharge summaries.
Oh, I did just start taking an extra call at another. We're branching out into a private hospital here, and a couple of the 5 of us we don't have any residents there or any mid levels. So we were just talking yesterday about how to do that. So we'll figure it out.
In discharge summaries, brevity is a soul of wit, as they say.
That's right. That's right.
So, okay, well, thank you very much, Andy. I really appreciate your time, and I definitely encourage anybody to reach out to Andy offline. Obviously, this talk and these conversations could last for hours, and once we start getting back together for meetings and stuff, this is usually the kind of stuff we talk about at some restaurant somewhere, and connect the residents with the former alumni during those things. But this was a great way to start that process. So Andy, congratulations on your new job, and it's great to see how big your family's getting, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
guys
Andy.
very much.
Great job.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.